Hi guys, welcome back to our look at the Atlas of Christian Monasticism. In this video we're going to look more at the precursors to Christian monasticism that had a direct, or at least geographically close, connection to the roots of Christian monasticism. We're going to look at a few groups that existed in ancient Egypt and the Levant that may or may not have had a direct relationship with the founding principles of the Christian monastic movement. If there wasn't direct connection, these are at least notions of life and of religion that were existing in the ancient world at the same time Christian monasticism will be starting to take off. Now, all these, which we're going to look at, predate Christian monasticism, several by 100 years, several hundred years. But nevertheless, it's information and ways of thinking that would have existed and had been in the general psyche, the general atmosphere that the Christian monks would have seen. We see here several images drawn from the Atlas, and we're going to look at some of these breakdowns. The first group to talk about would sort of be the cloistered monks of Serapis. Cloistered, coming from the Latin to lock away, refers to a set of monks of an Egyptian flavor. Now, this is not Egyptian Christian, but Egyptian pagan or Egyptian pre-Christian. Now, they're going to have an interesting way of life. They are going to seek silence and stillness and withdraw from society, particularly by going to the desert. Egypt is going to be known for having deserts. You will learn, if you haven't learned already, in geography about how the Nile Delta and the Nile River creates a very fertile area due to its floods. But once you're away from the Nile, it can be a very desolate wilderness. This group, the monks of Serapis, are going to seek God in this silence and solitude. And this is an idea that Christian monks will also pick up on. The idea of silence and solitude as ways to find closer to God. The cloistered monks of the Temple of Serapis are not going to be priests of the god. They are going to be people seeking either an oracle, a prophecy, or to obtain a healing for themselves or someone else. And in seeking this, they're going to go to the Temple of Serapis in the desert and pray and fast and work tasks. Again, hoping to receive from this god, we would say false god, but this god, an oracle or a healing. This concept that a monk can pray for others is something that we're going to see taken up by the Christian monks as they flee from the world, that fuga mundi, for the sake of their own soul, but as they also seek to bring about the kingdom of God by praying for the world. So even though they are in exile, they can still pray for the world. They can still do good for the world. Our next group is going to be an interesting one here. Philosophical monasticism. This comes much from the ancient Greek mentality. And here we will have the Neoplatonists, the New Platonists, the Pythagoreans, which, yes, they come from Pythagoras, the a squared, b squared, c squared guy. And they're going to have many things. Again, they're going to be this ascetical life of self-denial and withdrawal. This philosophical monasticism of the Greeks, which we'll see in Alexandria. Remember, Alexandria, Egypt, was pretty much a Greek city in Egypt ever since Alexander the Great founded it. But they're going to have this element of an austere or ascetical life, of self-denial, but also of community, of common life. And there's going to be a call to withdrawal and solitude so that they can meditate and ponder higher things. In Greek philosophy, whether it's Plato or Pythagoras, there's going to be this idea that there is something beyond what we see, a perfect idea or perfect image or perfect existence. And the idea is going to be that we can remember this by meditation, by thought, by contemplation. Now that's for the Neoplatonists. The Pythagoreans are going to have this idea that math and numbers and these things, these universal truths of, again, mathematics, can in their own way be the language of God. And so they are likewise going to have this idea of meditation. The Pythagoreans, for example, are going to have an aesthetic community. They're going to have a rule that's going to be rather strict, and it's going to regulate silence and abstinence from meat and flesh. A daily examination of conscience, not in the way we would, as in like rule sins, but in their failings, their faults, their errors in meditation. These methods and practices are going to be meant to foster rational thinking. They are monastics for the sake of reason, not for the sake of religion, because for them, reason was religion. Likewise, the Neoplatonists are going to seek to encounter the one truth, the one universal, the supreme God, the source of all that is good, the source of all knowledge. And to this end, again, they're going to live an austere life of asceticism. They're not going to marry, they're not going to eat meat, they're going to sleep very little. And again, they're going to foster this idea of controlling their bodies. Now, this idea of silence and prayer and thought and control of the flesh can be echoed in many aspects of Christian monasticism and Christianity in general. For example, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 10, we hear, "In a flood of words you will not avoid sin." In other words, silence is golden. If we talk too much, we make mistakes. Likewise, these elements that we can see in the monks of Serapis, but also the Platonists and the Pythagoreans, we can see echoed in the role of St. Benedict. For example, chapter 6 on restraint of speech. Again, not talking, having value for silence. Chapter 7 on humility, thinking yourself inferior, but in a Christian context. Chapters 39 and 40 on how much food and drink a monk should eat, and how he should avoid overindulgence. The observance of Lent, again, chapter 49, the idea that the life of a monk should be a constant Lent, constant prayer and fasting, but even more so during the actual season of Lent. These are all going to be elements that you can at least see tastes of in the stuff that came before, in the similar areas. Again, that doesn't mean a perfect one-to-one correlation. It's not that the monks of Serapis or the Neoplatonists or the Pythagoreans caused Christian monasticism to evolve in the way it did. You can't ever know that for a fact. But nevertheless, we can see how certain elements of thinking in the way of life of ancient Egypt may have had a factor in how Christian monasticism will eventually evolve. Our next group are the Manichaeans, the heralds of the kingdom of light. Manichaeus. The Manichaeus are going to be one of the thorns in the side of the early church. In fact, St. Augustine of Hippo will deal with them increasingly. He will actually at one point be a Manichaeist. So the Manichaeans are going to believe that contemplation on one's soul as a way of bettering yourself or as a way of taking part in the nature of God. They're going to have an idea that salvation, your reincarnation or your getting into heaven, is based on knowledge of God, this learning. In many ways, they're going to be like Gnosticism, though there are some slight differences. But it's going to be this idea that knowledge is your way to salvation. Not knowledge. It's complicated. It's nuanced. But anyway, this idea of meditation on the Spirit to grow and to be saved. Because the Manichaeism and Manichaeism is going to see the material world as corrupt and evil and this prison. And they're going to see the Spirit as good. But anything that's material will be regarded as evil. This is interesting because in some ways, this idea is similar to Christianity. This idea that you should not live for the flesh. But in Christianity, we would not say that the flesh is evil. Again, we have to remember that in the incarnation, Christ became flesh. Christ took on human flesh and a human nature. Because God has taken it on, it cannot therefore be evil. So matter is important. Our flesh is important. But we can't let the flesh lead the soul into corruption. Just like we can't let spiritual practices destroy the flesh. Because fasting, prayer, giving up sleep, giving up meat, all these things can be very good to strengthen your will and strengthen your spiritual resolve. But if you do it to the point where it can cause you physical injury and harm, then that's not good. At least not in the Christian mindset. Because the spirit and the flesh go hand in hand into salvation. So it's going to be interesting because for the Manichaeism and the Manichaeists, they're going to have this idea that strict ascetical lives are necessary, otherwise you're doomed to reincarnation. We can see here some of their reincarnation ideas. And if you can't tell, this is a philosophy that draws itself heavily from Eastern mentalities. So India and China even. It works its way into Egypt by the time of Christ. And again, the time of Augustine of Hippo, which will be later. He's the father of the church, but still later. And as I said, St. Augustine of Hippo will actually be a member of this sect in his early years, but he'll be quickly, or eventually, he will realize their errors and their mistakes and how their great wisdom falls short and falls short to Christianity. So that sort of wraps up our idea at our look at these precursor ideas, the monks of Serapis, the philosophical monasticism of the Greeks, but that will exist in Egypt, and Manichaeism, which again will exist in Egypt, but also Rome, and all these can be found throughout the Roman Empire, which again, Christianity will find itself a member of for the first several hundred years of its existence. I hope this was helpful. See you guys in the next video.